Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Boris Johnson has called on the country to unite around Brexit, describing it as a cause for hope, not fear, as he warned fellow Brexiteers not to gloat about their referendum victory. The Foreign Secretary used a major speech in London to reaffirm his passion for the EU divorce, but once again seized his moment in the spotlight to challenge Theresa May's authority by warning it would be intolerable for the UK to remain bound by EU laws. More now from Sky's senior political correspondent Robert Nisbet.
The Foreign Secretary preparing to unite a divided nation with a dawn jog along the Mall. But before he arrived at the speech venue, his Valentine advances were already being spurned. His task to lay out an optimistic vision of Brexit and lay Remainers' fears to rest by highlighting the opportunities of going it alone.
No one should think that Brexit is some economic panacea any more than it is right to treat it as an economic pandemic. On the contrary, the success of Brexit will depend on what we make of it.
But Boris Johnson had a second mission: to neutralise the Chancellor's argument for only modest changes to our trading relationship with the EU.
It's only by taking back control of our regulatory framework and our tariff schedules that we can do these deals and exploit the changes in the world economy.
When it came to questions, the event became more animated, especially when Sky News asked whether he was too divisive a figure to woo the sceptics.
So do you regret some of the language perhaps you used during the EU referendum and since then? And so now it may seem a bit strange that you're trying to reach out to some of those people.
I don't wish to contradict you in any way, but I think I've always been extremely moderate in my language and loving and caring, and that is my intention.
Unsurprisingly, leading opposition Remainers were not convinced.
He has absolutely no credibility at all when it comes to lecturing people on the need to unify. This is somebody who has been our country's divider-in-chief for the last couple of years.
While in Brussels, the Commission President was stung by Mr Johnson's claim that the EU was trying to build an overarching European state.
We are not the United States of America. We are the European Union, which is a rich body because we have these 27, 28 nations. The European Union cannot be built against the European nations. So this is total nonsense.
The Leave Means Leave pressure group welcomed the positive tone of the speech. But what of those in Wood Green in North London, where 3/4 voted to stay? Were they wooed?
I think they're going to see through him. And he, to be honest, seemed quite awkward, like he didn't really want to be doing it. Like, I don't think people will relate to you very well around this area.
I'm a local coffee shop owner. What we do here is we serve coffee to everybody, and we're seeing less and less Europeans. People don't feel as welcome in the UK as they used to.
1 in 5 words he uses, obviously from the Eton background, right? So 1 in 5 persons uses, for the people in this area, they don't even know what he's talking about.
It was a typically florid performance, the first of 5 major speeches by senior ministers as the negotiating response to our future relationship with the EU starts to set. Next up, the embattled Prime Minister on Saturday. Robert Nisbet, Sky News, Westminster.
The Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson has called on the country to unite behind Brexit, saying that Britain's departure from the European Union was not a great V sign from the cliffs of Dover. In the first of a series of speeches by ministers that they're calling the road to Brexit, Mr Johnson said that leaving the European Union could result in an outward-looking, confident UK. Labour called his words empty rhetoric. Our political correspondent Vicky Young reports.
We're on the road to Brexit, but cabinet ministers are still arguing about which route to take. Do we stay close to the European Union and all its rules, or take off in a completely different direction? Many are anxious about the journey ahead, including Liberal Democrats who laid on this less than friendly welcome for the Foreign Secretary. He's trying to reach out to soothe concerns and convince them that Brexit is grounds for much more hope than fear.
It's not good enough for us now to say to Remainers, you lost, get over it, because we must accept that the vast majority are actuated by entirely noble sentiments.
Brexit's not about shutting Britain off, he said. It's about going global.
I absolutely refuse to accept the suggestion that it is some un-British spasm of bad manners. It's not some great V sign from the cliffs of Dover. It is the expression of a legitimate and natural desire for self-government of the people, by the people, for the people.
At times, this speech felt like a return to the heat of the referendum debate. And Mr Johnson certainly hasn't changed his mind about the need to diverge from EU rules.
The British people should not have new laws affecting their everyday lives imposed from abroad when they have no power to elect or remove those who make those laws. That would be intolerable, it would be undemocratic, and it would make it all but impossible for us to do serious free trade deals.
So a familiar theme of taking back control, which puts him at odds with some cabinet colleagues. As the face of the Leave campaign, some question whether Boris Johnson is really the right person to try to heal the divisions of Brexit. But he acknowledges today that that positive case for leaving the EU still needs to be made and says that he has to try to make it. But what about the obstacles that could lie ahead? Some want more practical answers.
Boris is really good at the broad brushstrokes, but I think what's really needed now are the details. You know, we're just over 14 months away from the UK leaving the European Union, and details on things like customs and borders, how the really difficult issue of the Irish border is going to be delivered, how EU citizens will be able to stay here, the position that they'll be in. All that is needed now.
More flesh on the bones is what critics want. Downing Street insists they'll get that in the coming days, when the spotlight turns to Theresa May and what's billed as a significant speech on security. Vicky Young, BBC News, Westminster.
Boris Johnson used his big Brexit speech today to declare his commitment to the benefits of life outside the EU. Cabinet unity, however, did not get the same treatment. The Foreign Secretary refused to rule out resigning if his colleagues don't back his vision. Angus Walker reports.
Valentine's Day. Perfect timing for Boris Johnson to deliver what sounded like a love letter to Brexit.
I want to show you today that Brexit need not be nationalist but can be internationalist. It's not an economic threat but a considerable opportunity. Not un-British but a manifestation of this country's historic national genius.
Outside, pro-EU protesters were also showing their feelings, and he had a message for them.
I fear that some people are becoming ever more determined to stop Brexit, to reverse the referendum vote of June the 23rd, 2016, and to frustrate the will of the people. I believe that would be a disastrous mistake.
Brexit was about breaking up with a European superstate, he said, a rejection of being ruled by Brussels.
It's only by taking back control of our laws that UK firms and entrepreneurs will have the freedom to innovate without the risk of having to comply with some directive devised by Brussels at the urgings of some lobby group with the specific aim of holding back a UK competitor. That would be intolerable, it would be undemocratic.
In Brussels, there was a rejection of his advances.
Some in the British political society are against the truth, pretending that I'm a stupid, stubborn federalist, that I'm in favour of a European superstate. I'm strictly against a European superstate.
In many ways, Boris Johnson was outlining his personal Brexit blueprint. So what if his cabinet colleagues didn't agree?
Will you make your own offer of solidarity and unity today and guarantee you won't resign from the cabinet this year?
Well, Tom, look, you know, we're all very lucky to serve, and I'm certainly one of those.
So a speech about the benefits of leaving left questions unanswered about his own possible departure. This was the first of a series of speeches from cabinet ministers on Brexit, and the speech from Boris today, really, you could have heard it during the referendum campaign in 2016. His critics here in Westminster and indeed in the business world say it lacked clarity. It didn't address the practical questions around Brexit, but he was very clear about wanting a complete and clean break from Europe, and that may lead to fresh clashes between Boris Johnson, colleagues in the Conservative Party, indeed inside the cabinet.
Angus Walker, Westminster, thank you.
Now, Britain would be mad if it ended up with a Brexit settlement which kept the country bound by EU rules. That's according to Boris Johnson, who was in upbeat mood today about leaving the EU, describing it as the grounds for much more hope than fear. But the Foreign Secretary refused to rule out the possibility that he might resign if the government negotiated a soft Brexit. The speech was part Valentine's card, part knuckle dusting, part job application.
Bear with me, but British politics in the era of Brexit has become a bit like this fish tank, with gilled creatures, great and small, endlessly circling around the same questions. Hard Brexit, soft Brexit, soggy Brexit. It is mesmerising, possibly stupefying, and now and again, something new happens.
I've crossed Westminster Bridge from the Houses of Parliament to come and see the other shark pool, the real one here at Sea Life London, and its newest addition, a bow-mouthed guitar fish, half shark, half ray. To his fellow fish, notoriously promiscuous, slippery, difficult to read, flamboyant, loves an audience. And his name is Boris.
From fish tank to think tank and to the Boris without gills. He used Valentine's Day to send a love bomb to fearful Remainers suffering from what he calls Brexosis.
It's not good enough for us now to say to Remainers, you lost, get over it, because we must accept that the vast majority are actuated by entirely noble sentiments.
So much for the Valentine bit. Then there was the knuckle duster, to those Remainers who dare to subvert what he calls the will of the people.
In some cases, alas, I detect a hardening of the mood and a deepening of the anger. I fear that some people are becoming ever more determined to stop Brexit, to reverse the referendum vote of June the 23rd, 2016, and to frustrate the will of the people. I believe that would be a disastrous mistake that would lead to permanent and ineradicable feelings of betrayal.
But Boris being Boris, the Foreign Secretary cannot resist the temptation to go off colour.
As I've just discovered, more than 1 million people who go to Thailand every year, where our superb consular services deal with some of the things that they get up to there. The statistical on which I make no comment.
In Brussels, Jean-Claude Juncker took exception to the suggestion in the speech that he was trying to create a European superstate.
Some in the British political society are against the truth, pretending that I'm a stupid, stubborn federalist, that I'm in favour of a European superstate. I'm strictly against a European superstate.
And in London, one prominent Remainer from Labour was also not entirely convinced.
I don't think Boris will ever be able to unify this country, because nobody will forget the lies that he told, in particular the £350 million extra per week he promised to the NHS if we voted to leave the European Union.
There were questions from the floor, and I did try my very best to ask why the Foreign Secretary had waited 18 months to give a speech meant to reassure the narrowly losing side in a bitterly divided country.
Matt Fry.
Thank you. Yep. Somebody at the back. Do I see anyone? Do I see anyone else? Just pointed to me.
But alas, the Foreign Secretary was overruled by his own host, Policy Exchange. Which led me back to the fish tank and to thoughts about pecking orders and power. If these fish were members of the cabinet, who would the Prime Minister be here? Or the Chancellor? And how much could they trust any shark?
Hello.
Well, hi!
Name's Bruce.
Hollywood had the answer in this memorable clip.
And why trust a shark, right?
Why indeed?
So how will Remainers in his own party react to the Foreign Secretary's speech? Well, I spoke to the pro-Europe Conservative MP, Anna Soubry. So Boris Johnson issued today a bit of a love letter on Valentine's Day to Remainers who suffered from what he might, I think what he called Brexosis. But in this love letter, he also managed to make some off-colour jokes about the Thai sex trade and dogging. Do you think that he got the tone absolutely right?
No, he got it absolutely wrong. I mean, people aren't interested in Boris's jokes and rather smutty comments. What they want to know is the detail now. People have accepted that we're leaving the European Union largely. And we now want to know what is the government's preferred option? We know there are various options. We know the government, which supports Brexit, has done an analysis of those options. We know that whichever option we choose, it's going to harm our economy, so we want to do the very least harm that we possibly can. And what Boris didn't do was actually go into that grown-up detail of the options that we now face, options apparently that he faces in the decisions that he will be helping to form in Cabinet.
But what he was also trying to do was to reassure Remainers on the losing side who were too fearful about the consequences of Brexit. He was appealing to people like you. Now, did he manage to reassure you?
Oh, I didn't realise he was trying to appeal to me, or indeed people like me, because he didn't come across like that, unfortunately, at all. And I think the great danger that he's actually done is that I think he will have entrenched in many people, I'm not saying myself, but a real feeling that this is somebody who does not understand British business, who does not understand how the single market operates and the huge benefits it confers on our economy, who has no idea about global trade, in fact has pretty much no idea at all, other than the ability to make smutty comments and keep giving us all this piffle, I think is the word that he might use. You know, we've had the debate on the EU referendum, Leave won. So we've had all this airy-fairy stuff about how brilliant it's all going to be. Well, let's now get into the detail and let's have a proper debate about the options that he is facing and where we are going to make sure that we protect our economy.
Recently, you called for him, for the Foreign Secretary, to be sacked. Are you still?
Oh, I'm afraid to say that Boris has confirmed my very worst fears about him. I don't think he's a very good Foreign Secretary. I think he has, on a number of occasions, broken collective responsibility. But I think today he really has hugely lacked the sort of grown-up, responsible, sensible approach that we expect from one of the most senior members of our Cabinet in the approach to Brexit. It was a very poor it was actually a pitiful speech, and I think a lot of people actually found it really rather embarrassing. Boris was a great mayor of London, no debate about that. He's obviously very bright. I think he has got skills, but I mean, when it comes to Brexit, from the very outset, Boris simply lost the plot. I think, unfortunately, put his own ambitions before the ambitions of our country, and I'm afraid his constituents as well.
But let's be honest, there is no apparent end to this civil war in the Tory party. And what you're basically doing, whether you like it or not, is paving the way for Jeremy Corbyn to move into number 10.
Well, I think that's absolute twaddle.
OK. From piffle to twaddle, we've heard it all. Thank you very much, Anna Soubry.